Final Fantasy Tactics Director responds to Western localization discourse surrounding Unicorn Overlord. It is unacceptable for someone to alter a work without considering the original author's intent. Gee, it's almost like this is happening in another industry. Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to another GNRO Minicast. I am your host, Adam Mickelson, aka Drak. I hope everybody's having an awesome day or night when you're listening to this, and we once again have another story brought to us by boundingintocomics.com, where we are getting an article from Ryan Pearson, and I feel that this is something that needs to be discussed, especially in regards to situations like the Lovely Complex situation in the anime dubbing industry and what they're going through, because guess what, boys and girls, it's also happening in the video game industry. So let's go ahead and get some insight from somebody who maybe doesn't have the universal perspective on things. After Unicorn Overlord's English translation came under fire for being more flowery than its original Japanese release, Final Fantasy Tactics director Yasumi Matsuno stepped in to offer a stern but sympathetic take on the abysmal and disrespectful state of the Western localization industry. On February 21st, Vanillaware launched a demo for their then upcoming and now released tactical JRPG Unicorn Overlord, which is also, I believe, developed by Atlus. I'm actually very interested in trying this out, because I think it's basically Atlus's attempt in order to do a Fire Emblem. And so at that point, I'd like to see what they do, especially since they got Matsuno to help them out. Upon release, thanks to the rising awareness among consumers regarding the West's blatant and continual mistreatment of Japanese works, the demo found itself subjected to intense scrutiny for possible localization changes by various players. Among these players was Twitter user Tactics Ogre, who, after comparing the Japanese and English demos of the game, took to the social media platform to inform the public. After playing the English demo, I can say quite confidently that the localization is abhorrent. Okay, well, let's find this out. We even have a tweet from him, providing a thread of numerous examples to support his point. Zakogdo, if I'm saying that wrong, sorry, first noted how the difficulty names were changed, seemingly to avoid offense to anyone who wished to play the easier modes. These were changed from casual, tactical, and expert to story, normal, and hard. Notably, early previews of the game had used sweet instead of story. Early previews had story as sweet. They made it less different to Japanese, theorized Zakogdo, but it seems casual is still a dirty word these days, even though most of the people who are complaining are very much casual gamers and just don't like being compared to such. Continuing, Zakogdo then highlighted over 30 scenes wherein the game's dialogue had been edited from normal speech to some kind of faux Shakespearean prose, which I have noticed a lot of translations tend to do this. Another one that comes to mind is Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions, where it was really hamming on like the Shakespearean thous and these and all that, and it isn't really necessary. This reeks of localizers who think themselves better writers than the original Japanese authors, opined Zakogdo. Sometimes that is the case. This is the source of many of the localization's problems. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring up these screenshots because it is an archived link, and I'm guessing that these eventually got taken down for violating whatever. But basically, the way that you can look at it, and the article later describes, is we had things like, "Are you worrying about Scarlet?" And when it got translated, it basically got from one sentence to about a paragraph, which is what I like to call an interjection of WORDBARF, because you could easily say this in a lot less words, but that seems to be happening a lot with a lot of these cases. But thankfully, the article actually does go into this, so we don't have to worry too much about it. So let's continue, shall we? For example, instead of "we completely fell for it," the English version sees the character Lex state, "Guy laid out the bait and we had to take a nibble." We could have easily just said "we completely fell for it." In another case, Renault's line about "decided to quiet down at last, has been changed to "so the foal has finally ceased braying, Yeah, this is unnecessary stuff, in all honesty. There were also cases where, in addition to being made more theatrical, some lines of dialogue saw their intents changed completely. A scene where Elaine insists he's fine and asks a knight to aid his mother has been changed in English to instead have him chastise the knight for just standing there and essentially shame him into something. Rolf is turned into a pessimist. Clive seems to mistake Adele wanting to recapture his kingdom as making merry. Elaine seems to mock or tease a friend's swampland home he's been tasked with liberating, and more. Well, yeah, this is just... I can just tell you, just from looking at this, it's just interjecting word barf, and in some cases it looks like they're outright changing a lot of what the characters are saying and the characters' motivations because of it. In fact, another example that I'll put up here because it's easier to read, Chloe's dialogue is rewritten to add in regular sarcastic comments and jabs at other characters when they weren't present in the Japanese dub. She is somewhat rude in Japanese, but the English script has played it up far more and makes her kind of obnoxious. Chloe, you should form a unit with Lex. Still, it would be risky to leave him by himself, understood. And unfortunately, it just, word vomit, and it doesn't really help. At one point, Priestess Scarlet admits to being scared after an ambush, but in English states she's only shaken, that's all, because you can't have a scared woman in English at all. You can't have women going through any kind of shock or trauma whatsoever, because that would make them perceivable as weak, which is stupid because everybody can be perceived as weak. Other female characters are also shown to have any shock or lack of confidence stripped away, because you can't do that. We have to have strong female characters, right? Except when it's part of the character, and it's part of the fact, because I'm guaranteeing you that some of this is probably they haven't engaged in combat before, or they got taken by surprise. Heaven forbid! Heaven forbid they exhibit human emotions! The knight Beaumont doesn't seem particularly posh or mannerly in Japanese, yet in English seems to not only be more verbose, like the rest of the cast, but puns about birds and chickens. So a bunch of word vomit is what that sounds like. Beaumont is one of the more extreme examples of fancification, having had his personality rewritten to constantly make absurd exclamations and allusions to avians. Sagagdo lamented, "If I were an Atlus localizer, I'd call this a cock-up." Oh, jeez. And yeah, we have even... Oh, now we have a perfect example here. So let's see what they actually did, and see what they did with Beaumont. So on the left is the Japanese, and on the right is what it got translated to. "Imbecile, what am I supposed to do with this batch of old women? What did you say? Why would the rebel army come to a place like this? It's all over. Failing in my duty like this will never be forgiven. There's one last thing to try. It'll be far, far away. Do you still want to come with me?" So these are the Japanese versions. "Imbecile, what do you expect me to do with a throng of unmagicked octogenarians? Good God! Oh, we're gonna use big words because they're big words and we want to sound smart! Seriously! See, this is why I say word vomit, people. Galerius's foot. What could they Galerius's foot. Okay, what could they possibly want with a place as disgusting as this? Okay, that's way more emphasis than I think the original line intended. "It's all over, lad. I'll be tarred, feathered, and paraded through the streets like a mustachioed chicken for this." I can see where they have the weird deal with birds. I think in all honesty, the Japanese dub has more impact than what he says in the English translation. That's bad. "I refuse to play their farmstead foul." There's another bird. "There's one last haven that may offer us protection." That's word vomit right there, 100%. "But it's far, so very, very far. Do you have the pluck to make this trek with..." Oh, god damn. Fire this person. Atlus, this person is not doing you any favors. Continued, Zakagdo asserted, "It's infuriating seeing this level of disregard for the characters they're supposed to be translating. The localizer thinks they're making some harmless joke when what they're actually doing is damaging the integrity of the character because they refuse to stop meddling." And that is kind of what's happening here, is because you're making him so freaking verbose, you're making him almost condescending in a way. Whereas like the image that they're giving us in his dialogue is like just he's a soldier. So at that point, we don't need to have words like unmagicked octogenarians coming from a soldier. We just need for him to be able to say the situation like he does in the Japanese dub. Like, these are straight and to the point. Why didn't you just straight translate this? Good God. Concluding their diatribe with a small caveat, now to be clear, I'm translating things literally to demonstrate the differences more clearly, and I don't posit that such translations would be suitable for a full localization, where character voice needs to be clearly conveyed. I think they're intentionally destroying it, almost as if they want it to fail. But my translations being boring doesn't make them wrong, and fancifying dialogue does not necessitate rewrites that result in changing characterization at the same time, they ultimately concluded. But the problem is that, okay, so you are fancifying the dialogue, which is in some cases changing their characterization overall, so it's not the character that the writer made! And therefore, it's not being conveyed properly, which means we have a translation problem. And ultimately, something that in the 90s and the early 2000s we would laugh at, these days we would look at you with a sense of incompetence, ultimately. As discussion soon exploded around Zactogdo's discovery, it proceeded to be joined by the aforementioned Matsuno. Though he had no involvement in the development of Unicorn Overlord, the esteemed creator of such tactical RPGs, I believe he did have an advisory role, but maybe I'm wrong. Such tactical RPGs as Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, felt compelled to offer his own thoughts on the overall localization discourse. Yeah, I thought he advised on Unicorn Overlord, but if he didn't, then my apologies. Reading this reminded me of the original version of Final Fantasy Tactics, recalled Matsuno. It wasn't that the translators went out of control, but simply that the level of English translations was low. For example, the proper noun, Hokuto Knights, which is the Sky Heaven Knights, was translated as Order of the Northern Sky. And this is where I get where he likes what they did with War of the Lions. I don't. I think it was just a bunch of word barf in a lot of prominent scenes in the game. At the time, even with the development team, there were doubts as to whether this was the correct translation. He does continue, however, the schedule was given the highest priority, and the game was carried out as it was. Therefore, when overseas players praised the scenario of FFT, Final Fantasy Tactics, as being good, I thought, and still do, really? I mean, I get his point of view, but War of the Lions, and I'll continue to argue this, War of the Lions kind of made it worse in a lot of ways, because a lot of just straight and to the point lines are basically filled with a bunch of word barf, and they lose a little bit of their impact from that. Vagrant Story, on the contrary, received high praise abroad due to the high level of English translation, Matsuno added. Alex Aokaija, who was in charge of the English translation, he was also in charge of FF12 and Tactics Ogre Remake after Vagrant, and his English translations were highly appreciated. I can see why. Like, I don't think the complaint for War of the Lions has the same problem with those games as it does with FF12 and Vagrant Story. There is a little bit of word barf in FF12, but I have since heard that the remake fixes a lot of that. And Vagrant Story was very straight and to the point. So I don't think that was a problem ultimately with those, at least not in comparison. I do think I am gonna, to Matsuno's credit, I am gonna say some things weren't translated properly in the original Tactics, and that does get fixed in War of the Lions, but not to the overall. It's a minor thing compared to the overall word vomit that happened. Unsurprisingly, Matsuno's opinion would spark a wave of discussion all on its own, much of it revolving around the fact that while the creator may have been trying to give localizers the benefit of the doubt, his response seemed to ignore the Western industry's proudly bragged about disregard for the original author's creative vision. Almost like another story I talked about, cough cough, Jello Apocalypse, cough cough. To this end, the game developer eventually returned to the conversation to offer his thoughts on this specific issue. This is my personal opinion, but may I share it with you? I believe that it is unacceptable for someone to alter a work without considering the original author's intent. However, when the market or language is different, a direct translation may not convey the intended meaning accurately. This is especially true for humor. Therefore, I think some degree of alteration is unavoidable. I would agree with that concept. However, the amount of alteration that is happening with localizations now is ridiculous compared to what he's explaining. We don't have that problem anymore. Now everything is being gone over with a fine-tooth comb as offensive. And frankly, it isn't offensive. The people who are reading it just need to grow a backbone. Because that's the thing about media and video games and comedy and movies and TV, is that some of these, the views that are being conveyed in these forms of media is supposed to question your own beliefs. It's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, to make you think about it. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the US right now have become so puritanical that if you so much as even question or presume to question their beliefs, they just give you that Greta Thunberg, how dare you look, which is still equally ridiculous, which is why I had the GIF up. The issue lies in whether the original author has consented to these alterations. Something that I've been screaming for quite a while now. Has anyone confirmed whether the author of Unicorn Overlord has approved its English translation? I would like to know that as well. He then proposed, in any case, I think both arguments have merit. Translating it faithfully to the original and allowing some degree of adaptation. I encourage discussion on this matter, as I do not intend to take sides. However, if the original author approves, I believe that should be respected. That's all. And in that case, I totally agree with Matsuno. If the original, or if the creator of Unicorn Overlord, specifically the game director, is okay with this and his vision is being adhered to, then you're fine. If he looks at it and goes, no, this is stupid, change it, then you got to change it. And the people who have to change it don't get to complain on Twitter about it. Or at least they can, but they also get to have the same customers laugh at them relentlessly. Even then, some implored Matsuno to understand what Western gamers have had to endure in regards to botched localizations. I don't think this was going to go well, but we'll find out. Most of the times, original creators don't even know the target language of the translation, and they agree believing that people responsible for the translation job are doing their job right, which is the opposite in most cases, wrote Linkasobi, who's involved in this conversation. In turn, Matsuno stated that he was aware that this is the case, and it is very unfortunate, then reiterated his contempt for deviating from the original work, though he did note that some degree of adaptation is unavoidable. And again, I agree with Matsuno. I think that you do need to adhere to the creator's wishes, but I also think Linkasobi makes some sense here, because unfortunately, a lot of these Japanese creators, Japan still has a very bad mindset of only thinking within its own borders. And so unfortunately, anything that goes outside of it, they just kind of don't care about. And that still happens even to this day, although a lot of mangaka and media execs in Japan are starting to realize, yeah, we have to think outside the box a little bit. It's starting to get a little better. And I mean, I emphasize a little, but it is happening. And unfortunately, I think this is going to happen over the next few months and even years. Japanese creators and companies are going to get more involved. It's why we're hearing a lot about in the anime industry how Japanese companies are looking towards AI to solve translation problems. And ultimately, you know, it's great and all that the Crunchyroll CEO says that he's only testing it out. But once the Japanese companies basically say, oh, we don't have to hire Crunchyroll to do that part, we can just do it ourselves with the AI, then that's going to hurt localizers on US shores. That is, and eventually if they do look into things like AI dubbing for voice acting and stuff like that, it's going to hurt even more. And ultimately, I can see Japan's argument in this regard, because we have been so disrespectful to their properties, but at the same time, I also don't want it to happen, because what is going to happen out of that is Japanese companies are going to get so pissed off when a lot of us stop trusting them, or at least when enough companies go down the tubes, that we aren't going to be able to get this anime here, and Japan's probably just going to sit there and go, we don't feel like, if you want to be able to get it, you have to go to these platforms, which we don't want to trust, which we don't want to rely on. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, as Matsuno is saying as well. An apparent translator themselves, Mad Sanchez 09, implored, Mr. Matsuno, neutrality is fine, but the person you're quoting is quite undermining localization. It is seen as both positive and negative, okay? Offering his final thoughts on the matter in response to Matt Sanchez's concern, Matsuno admitted the source of the quote may have been misleading. That might have been a mistake. However, rather than continuing to focus on the conversation on himself, the developer then turned the question to the audience, asking, anyway, I'm interested in what players think is best. While I believe that significant alterations that ignore the original work's intent are nonsensical, where is the line for fidelity? Offering two arguments for players to side with, the first being that translations should be faithful to the original work no matter what, and the second being that freedom in translation is acceptable as long as it's being adhered to within those guidelines. Matsuno ultimately concluded, is there no middle ground between A and B? I'm curious to see where your discussions will lead. Thank you. There is an A and B, and unfortunately, one side of this argument believes that there is only black and white in this regard, whereas the actual fans, the actual customers, believe that there is a gray area and that we can make it work within certain bounds. And it's just unfortunate that, you know, when the examples that this article is giving are more on the black and white front. The only opposite that I would say in that regard is Link Asobi, where he is actually offering a little bit of gray matter there. Unicorn Overlord is now available to charge into battle on the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and the Xbox Series X and S. My overall thoughts on this is that Matsuno brings up a lot of very good points. In fact, as a little snippet or an Easter egg for you guys, I was going to be doing an additional minicast in regards to it was an extension for the Lovely Complex situation, because up to that point I had actually taken the interpretation that the creator of Lovely Complex was the one that had committed suicide shortly after the whole fiasco. It isn't the case, and Alex the Shadow Blazer kind of confirmed that. And so at that point, I actually had an article where the mangaka for Hajime no Ippo came out and basically said a lot of the same things here. And I decided not to do it just because of the inaccuracy, but I'm going to put that up as an extra link in this particular minicast, so you guys can check that out, because he basically conveys the exact same points, I think, that Matsuno is conveying, which is that, yes, you do need to adhere to the original intents of the original creator. However, there is gray area, and you have to be able to work that through. Certain mannerisms, certain humors are not going to translate over to various countries and whatnot, but it's not the localizer's job to then change the structure of the joke. It's at least not in the sense where they get to preach about it. They get to change the structure of the joke to make the joke land better in that particular country or area. And that's where a lot of the localization problems right now are having issues with. The best example that I can give you is Jamie Markey's changing of a line in Ancient Magus Bride, where she basically, instead of, it was just a boob joke about how people were constantly mentioning about her boobs, and so she decided to wear a sweater that day, instead blaming the patriarchy, because that joke makes sense. Well, it does to people who think that feminism can actually produce humor, and unfortunately, no, it can't. So I'm with Matsuno on this one. I do think there's gray area where we could be able to make changes, but acceptable changes, and be able to do our job properly. And those are the localizers that I would want to keep. Everybody else that does shit like Jello Apocalypse, I'd have no problem showing the door, and probably recommending them to their local McDonald's so they can actually learn how the real life works, because unfortunately college did not prepare them adequately for it. But that's my opinion overall on it. I agree with Matsuno on the impressions that they're giving, and as far as Unicorn Overlord, I'm still excited to be able to play it. Here's hoping that they fix a lot of those translation problems, or it is going to affect the sales of Unicorn Overlord in the States, and I would rather not have that happen. But what do you guys think about it? If you like my opinion on it, go ahead and leave a like on the video. If not, leave a comment down below and tell me your take on the translation situation, and we can have that discussion. And also, if you like the content, maybe consider giving a subscribe to the channel, as it does help me out in the algorithms and whatnot, and shows YouTube that maybe we do like having other people's opinions at work, instead of just the normal garbagey crap that we normally get from one side or another. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening in on this. Thank you so much to Ryan Pearson and Bounding Into Comics for getting into this subject. I actually do like the way the article is written, and I will see you guys next time for the next GNRO Minicast. Take care.